"Sign the papers or we burn every fence post on this property, old man." Razor Colton gripped the gate with both hands and smiled the way men smile when they believe the outcome is already decided. Behind him, 300 armed men stretched across every ridge, a wall of numbers designed to crush a single man's will before breakfast. Ben Tatum stood on his porch and said nothing. His coffee was still warm. His hands were completely still. He looked to every one of those 300 men, exactly like what they wanted him to be, a frightened old rancher with nowhere left to go and nothing left to fight with. What Razor and those 300 men don't know was that they had just surrounded a 26-year Navy SEAL who had been quietly preparing for exactly this moment for 2 years. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The sun wasn't fully up yet when Ben Tatum walked out onto the porch. He did this every morning. Had done it for 11 years, ever since he came home from the Navy, and decided that the best thing a man could do after a lifetime of war was watch the sunrise in peace. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and stood there at the railing, looking out over 400 acres of Texas hill country. Rolling green hills, oak trees, a creek that ran cold even in August, and a red barn his grandfather had painted by hand in 1959. This land had a name: Tatum's Bluff. His great-grandmother, Amela May Tatum, had bought it in 1921. She had walked into the Kerr County deed office, a black woman, alone, carrying a leather purse with every dollar she had saved over 14 years of domestic work, and she had put her money on the counter. The clerk had stared at her like she had lost her mind. She had stared right back. She signed the papers and walked out with her deed, and not 1 inch of this land had ever left the Tatum family since. Ben thought about Amela May most mornings. He thought about what it must have cost her, not just the money. He finished his coffee, pulled on his work gloves, and went to feed the horses. The silver Mercedes appeared at the gate at 9 o'clock. Ben saw it from the far side of the pasture. He didn't hurry. He finished filling the water trough, patted the brown mare on her neck, and walked back toward the house at his own pace. The man standing at the gate wore a gray suit that probably cost more than Ben's truck. He was holding a manila folder, and he was smiling. The kind of smile that was really just a warning dressed up in good manners. "Mr. Tatum." He extended his hand. "Harlan Birch. I'm Senior Acquisitions Counsel for Ridley Development Group. Do you have a few minutes?" Ben shook his hand once. "Talk." Birch laid it out quickly and smoothly, the way men like him always did, like they'd rehearsed it in the car. Donovan Ridley, one of the largest real estate developers in the state of Texas, had identified Tatum's Bluff as a key acquisition for Ridley Vista, a $2.4 billion luxury resort and golf development. The surrounding land had already been secured. Ben was the final piece. Birch opened the folder and held it out. $4.2 million. Cash. 60-day close. Ben took the folder. He didn't look at the number first. He read from the beginning, page by page, the way his mother had always told him to read anything a man in a suit handed him. Birch stood there, still smiling, clearly expecting this to be over in 5 minutes. He got to page 7. There it was, buried in the legal language like a snake in tall grass. A clause giving Ridley Development the right to demolish all existing structures on the property within 90 days of closing. All existing structures. That included the farmhouse, the one Amela May had built in 1921, the one with her handprints still pressed into the stone of the fireplace. Ben read the clause twice. Then he looked up. "What's on page 7?" he said. Birch's smile flickered. "Standard language. Structural clearance for—" "That's Amela May's house." Ben's voice was flat and even. "My great-grandmother built that house with her own hands. And your client wants the right to knock it down in 90 days. Birch straightened up. The warmth dropped out of his voice completely. "Mr. Tatum, I'd encourage you to consider the number before you make any emotional decisions. $4.2 million is more than generous for a property of this—" "Of this what?" Ben said quietly. Birch didn't finish the sentence. He seemed to realize he was about to say something he couldn't take back. Ben closed the folder. He held it out. Tell Mr. Ridley this land is not for sale. Not at this price. Not at any price. He paused. Tell him I said good morning. Birch took the folder. The smile was completely gone now. He looked at Ben for a long moment, the look of a man recalculating, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. Ben stood at the porch railing and watched the silver Mercedes back down the drive and disappear around the bend of the road. The dust settled. The birds came back. The horses were quiet in the pasture. He put his gloves back on and went back to work. 2 days passed quietly. Too quietly, Ben thought. He went about his routine, feeding the horses, mending the east fence line, taking his evening walk along the creek. He didn't hear from Birch. Didn't hear from Ridley Development. Nothing. Just silence, and the kind of stillness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, because he'd learned a long time ago that silence wasn't always peace. Sometimes silence was just the moment before something hit you. It hit him on a Thursday morning. He walked out to the mailbox at the end of the drive and pulled out 3 envelopes, all official, all government seals, all postmarked the same day. He stood there at the mailbox and read each one. The first was from the Kerr County Zoning Board. It informed him that Tatum's Bluff had been selected for a routine environmental compliance audit. Pending the results, all current land use activities, including his cattle operation, could be subject to a temporary freeze. The letter was written in careful legal language, but the message underneath it was simple. We can shut you down. The second was from the County Water Authority. His water access permit, which had been active and uncontested for 11 years, was now under administrative review. No explanation, no timeline, just a cold, bureaucratic sentence that meant his cattle could run dry. The third was a property tax reassessment notice. Tatum's Bluff had been revalued at 3 times its previous assessment. Effective immediately. He owed the difference within 60 days. Ben read all 3 letters standing at the end of his driveway in the morning sun. Then he folded them neatly, put them in his back pocket, and walked back to the house. Calvin pulled in just before noon in his old gray Honda, 2 bags in the back seat, and a law school textbook on the passenger seat. He was 29, tall like his grandfather, with his grandmother's eyes and a wide, easy smile that Ben had always loved. The smile faded the moment he walked into the kitchen and saw the 3 letters laid out on the table. He picked up the zoning notice first, then the water letter, then the tax assessment. His jaw tightened with each one. Grandpa. He set them down. These didn't all arrive by accident. No, Ben said. They didn't. This is coordinated. Calvin pressed his finger on the table. Same postmark. 3 different agencies. All targeting the same property on the same day, 2 days after you turned down a $4 million offer. He looked up. This is Ridley. Ben poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of his grandson. He didn't look alarmed. He didn't look angry. He looked the way he always looked. Steady, like a man standing on solid ground while everything around him moved. I know, he said. He picked up his phone and called Elena Vance. She picked up on the second ring. Elena had been a Kerr County deputy for 16 years. She was one of the few people in this county Ben trusted completely. He told her about the letters. There was a pause on her end, the pause of someone choosing their words carefully on an open line. Ben, she said quietly, I can't say much right now. But what I can tell you is that what you're describing didn't come from any of those agencies on its own. The pressure is coming from somewhere above the sheriff's office. Another pause. Be careful. She hung up. Ben called Reverend Dorothy May Anson next. She was 71 years old, had lived in this county her whole life, and had seen things that would make younger people give up entirely. She never had. When he described the 3 letters, she didn't hesitate. Baby, I've seen this exact playbook twice before, she said, her voice sharp and clear as a church bell. They did it to the Henderson family in 2009, lost their farm in 8 months. Did it to the Morales family before that. They always come with lawyers first, and when the lawyers don't work, they find a legal crowbar. She paused. You watch yourself, Ben. He thanked her and set the phone down. Calvin was still standing at the table looking at the letters. Outside, the afternoon light was turning gold over the pasture. What do we do? Calvin asked. Ben sat down across from him. He looked at the 3 envelopes spread out on Amela May's table, the same table she had sat at, in this same kitchen, in 1921, after a county that didn't want her there told her she didn't belong. He thought about her. We don't panic, he said. And we don't move. Ben was up before the sun again. Calvin found him at the kitchen table at 5:30 in the morning, not with coffee this time, but with the phone pressed to his ear and a yellow legal pad in front of him, covered in neat, small handwriting. Calvin stood in the doorway in his socks, sleep still on his face, listening. Yes, Ben was saying. The full 40 acres surrounding the structure. That's what we discussed. A pause. And the registry publication, that goes through today? Another pause. A single nod. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. He hung up. Calvin crossed to the coffee maker. Who's Dr. Whitfield? Professor of Texas History at UT Austin. Ben capped his pen. We've been working together for about 6 months. Calvin turned around slowly. 6 months. He looked at his grandfather. On what, exactly? Ben slid the legal pad across the table. At the top, in capital letters, were the words, Texas Historic Landmark Designation, Tatum's Bluff. It took Calvin about 30 seconds to understand what he was looking at. The application was meticulous. 37 pages, with historical documentation going back to 1921. Amela May's original deed, photographs of the farmhouse at the time of construction, census records, county property histories, and a full architectural assessment of the 1921 structure certified by a licensed preservation specialist. Dr. Edison had authored the historical narrative section himself. An independent attorney had filed the formal application with the Texas Historical Commission 8 weeks ago. You did all this, Calvin said slowly, before Birch even showed up at the gate. I did it when I first heard what Ridley was building, Ben said. When he started buying up the surrounding land 2 years ago, I knew it was only a matter of time before he came knocking. And I knew when he knocked, and I said no, he wouldn't just walk away. He poured his coffee. So I made sure I had something he couldn't buy and couldn't tear down before he ever got here. Calvin sat down hard in the kitchen chair. He looked at the legal pad, then at his grandfather, then back at the legal pad. Grandpa, if this goes through, the zoning audit has no teeth. The water permit review loses its foundation. They can't touch the farmhouse. That's right. When does it publish? This morning. The Texas Historical Commission published the designation in the state registry at 9:17 a.m. Ben was in the barn when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Harlan Birch. He let it ring once more, then answered. Mr. Tatum. Birch's voice had changed completely. The smoothness was gone. What was left sounded tight and controlled, like a man working hard to keep his composure. I'm sure that you are aware that the Texas Historical Commission published a designation this morning. I am, Ben said. I think it would be in everyone's interest to have another conversation before this situation. Mr. Birch. Ben kept his voice completely even. I told you 2 days ago that this land is not for sale. That hasn't changed. The designation doesn't change my position. It just means your client has fewer options than he thought he did. He paused. Have a good day. He ended the call and set the phone back in his shirt pocket. When he came back into the house, Calvin was standing at the kitchen counter with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, staring out the window at the pasture. He called, Calvin said. It wasn't a question. He called. What did he say? Not much worth repeating. Ben washed his hands at the sink. Hand me that dish towel. Calvin passed it over. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Grandpa, how long did you know something like this was coming? Not just the offer. All of it. The pressure, the legal games. How long did you see it coming? Ben dried his hands slowly. He thought about how to answer that. He thought about dark rooms in Ramadi, about waiting, about the particular discipline of a man who had learned that the worst thing you could do when danger was building was to react before the moment was right. Long enough to get ready, he said. Calvin nodded, though Ben could tell he didn't fully understand yet. That was all right. He would. That evening they ate dinner together at a Melamay's table. Fried chicken, greens, cornbread. Simple food that tasted like home. Calvin was looser now, easier on his shoulders, laughing at something on his phone. Ben ate quietly and watched the window. The ridge to the east was empty. The road was still. But Ben Tatum had spent 26 years learning the difference between a threat that was finished and a threat that was only getting started. He kept watching. Calvin went to bed at 10:30. Ben heard the bedroom door close, heard the old floorboards settle, and then the house went quiet. He sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, finishing his coffee, thinking. The designation had gone through. The legal crowbar Ridley had been swinging was blunted, at least for now. By any reasonable measure, today had been a good day. Ben didn't feel like it had been a good day. He felt the way he used to feel the night before an operation. That low, steady hum in the chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement. It was awareness. Pure and animal and reliable. 26 years in naval special warfare had burned that feeling into him so deep that he trusted it more than he trusted almost anything else. Something was coming. He rinsed his mug, turned off the kitchen light, and went out to the porch. He sat in the dark, without moving. No porch light, no phone screen. Just the night sounds, crickets, the distant creak, a light wind moving through the oaks. His eyes adjusted slowly until the darkness became shapes, and the shapes became the fence line, the pasture, the road, the ridge. He was 40 minutes into his watch when he heard it. An engine, low and slow, running without headlights. The truck came from the north end of the road, moving at the pace of a man who didn't want to be noticed, but wasn't quite careful enough. Ben tracked it by sound first, then by the dark shape it made against the slightly lighter dark of the road. It slowed as it passed the east fence line, the stretch that ran closest to the property from the road, and then picked up again and kept moving south. Ben counted to 60. The truck came back. Same direction, same slow pace, same hesitation at the east fence. He counted again. It came back a third time. This time it stopped completely for about 15 seconds before moving on. Ben didn't move. He sat in the dark of the porch and filed every detail away like a man filling a cabinet. Tire sound, engine size, the exact point on the east fence where the driver's attention went each time. He'd done this in worse places than a Texas porch. He'd done this in alleyways in Mosul and on rooftops in Kandahar. The skill didn't leave you. It just waited. When the truck was gone for the third time and didn't come back, Ben went inside and called Ghost. Ghost's real name was Gerald Wayne Penn. He and Ben had served together for 14 years. 2 deployments in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and several other places that would never appear on any official record. Ghost had retired 2 years before Ben, and now worked as a federal security contractor out of Virginia. He was one of the most capable men Ben had ever known, and he answered his phone on the second ring no matter what time it was. "Talk," Ghost said. Ben told him. All of it. Ridley's offer, the coordinated legal harassment, the designation, and now the truck. He gave Ghost the details the way SEALs always exchanged information. Clean, factual, no dramatics. There was a short silence. "You think it escalates," Ghost said. It wasn't a question. "I think the designation made Ridley angry and desperate. Angry and desperate men make moves." Ben paused. "I need you ready to move if I call." "I'm already ready," Ghost said. "You know that." "I know. Send me the property layout." Entry points, blind spots, camera positions. Ben had already pulled up the file on his laptop. He sent it while they were still on the phone. Ghost confirmed receipt and told Ben to call the moment anything changed. Then he said one more thing before he hung up. Ben, don't wait too long to make the call when the time comes. I won't, Ben said. After he hung up, Ben went to the hall closet. He moved aside the hanging coats and checked the rifle. A .308 he'd kept clean and loaded for 11 years without needing it. He checked the scope, the chamber, the safety. All good. He put it back. He checked the 4 exterior cameras on his phone. Front gate, east fence, barn, back pasture. All functioning. Then he went back to the porch and sat down. He stayed until 3 in the morning. The road stayed empty. The ridge stayed dark. But the feeling in his chest, that low, steady hum, didn't go away. He went inside, set his alarm for 5, and placed his phone face up on the table next to a Melamay's Bible. He didn't sleep much. He never did the night before things started moving. Ben was outside at 5:15, same as always. The sky was that deep blue-gray color it gets just before the sun decides to show itself. Not dark anymore, but not light either. The kind of morning that makes everything look like a photograph. He had his coffee. He had his gloves folded over the porch railing. He had 11 years of mornings, just like this one, stored in his memory, like something sacred. He stepped to the edge of the porch and stopped. The eastern ridge was wrong. It took his eyes 2 seconds to confirm what his body already knew. The ridgeline, which every morning of every year held nothing but oak trees and open sky, had a different shape today. Darker, thicker, not trees. People. He turned his head slowly, the way you do when you don't want whatever you're looking at to know you've seen it. The north fence line. Same thing. Dark figures standing still in the gray morning light, evenly spaced, like fence posts that hadn't been there yesterday. He looked south without moving his feet. The road. Blocked. He lifted his coffee mug and took a slow sip. 300 men. Maybe more. Surrounding Tatum's Bluff from every direction, materializing out of the pre-dawn dark like something that had been building all night while he slept in pieces. Armed. Hooded. Silent at first, and then a voice cut through the quiet from the direction of the front gate, loud and unhurried. The voice of a man who was used to people listening. Mr. Tatum. A figure stepped forward at the gate. Medium height, compact build, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had never once in his adult life been told no. My name is Razor. Mr. Ridley would like to revisit the conversation you had with Mr. Birch. Ben didn't answer. He heard the back door open behind him. Calvin's footsteps on the porch boards, barefoot, moving fast, still half asleep. Ben extended his right arm straight out to the side without turning around. Stop. Calvin stopped. Grandpa. His voice was low and tight. What is basement? Ben didn't raise his voice, didn't turn around. Right now. I'm not going to just... Calvin. Still quiet, still level. But something in the tone ended the conversation completely. Basement. Lock the door. Don't come up until I call you by name. A pause. Then Calvin's footsteps moved back across the porch and into the house. The back door closed. Ben listened for the basement latch. He heard it. Good. He stood on the porch and looked out at 300 men and did what he had spent 26 years training to do. He assessed. Eastern slope. Gap in the formation, maybe 12 feet, where the terrain dipped, and 2 men had lost visual on each other. North fence. The spacing was uneven. Reactive rather than tactical. Men positioned by habit, not by training. The communication between them was sloppy. He could see heads turning, men checking with each other. No clear signal discipline. They were intimidating. They were numerous. But they had never in their lives faced a man who had held a defensive position in Ramadi for 11 hours with 3 wounded teammates and no air support. They were not military. He was. He had the entire property layout memorized the way other men memorized their children's birthdays. Every entry point, every sightline, every bottleneck. He had run scenarios in his head for 2 nights. He knew exactly where they were strong, and he knew exactly where they were not. Razor's voice came again from the gate, louder this time, with an edge in it. "Mr. Tatum, I'd encourage you to come down here and talk. This doesn't have to be difficult." Ben set his coffee mug down on the porch railing. He looked out at the ridge, the road, the fence lines. He looked at all of it, all 300 of them, and he felt something move through him that wasn't fear, wasn't anger, and wasn't desperation. It was clarity. The deep, clean, uncomplicated clarity of a man who has been preparing for a moment for a very long time and has just watched that moment arrive exactly as expected. He looked at Razor across 40 yards of open Texas ground, and Ben Tatum smiled. Not the smile of a man who had run out of options, not the smile of surrender or defeat or a man trying to hide how scared he was. The smile of a man who had just been handed the engagement he was built for. Razor stared at him. The smile didn't move. Ben turned and walked back into the farmhouse. Not fast, not slow. The same unhurried pace he used when he walked to the barn every morning. Razor's men were watching him from every direction, and the most important thing a man could do in that moment was make sure none of them understood what they were looking at. Let them think he was scared. Let them think he was shaking inside that house, scrambling, falling apart. Men who thought they had already won stopped paying attention to the details, and the details were exactly where Ben Tatum intended to win this thing. He sat down at Amela May's kitchen table, picked up his phone, and made the first call. 911. What is your emergency? This is Ben Tatum at Tatum's Bluff Ranch, off County Road 187. I have approximately 300 armed men surrounding my property. I need law enforcement on site immediately. A pause that lasted just a beat too long. Sir, I have your location. I'm dispatching a unit now. The woman's voice was flat. Professional in the way that people are professional when they've been told exactly what to say. Please be aware that response times in rural areas can be between 45 minutes to an hour. 45 minutes, Ben repeated. To an hour? Yes, sir. He thanked her and hung up. 45 minutes to an hour. For 300 armed men surrounding a private residence. He filed that away. The flatness of her voice, the rehearsed quality of it, the pause before she spoke. That pause told him everything. Somebody had made a call before he did. He dialed Elena Vance. She picked up before the first ring finished. Ben, I know. Her voice was hushed and tight, and there was wind in the background. She was outside. I'm on County Road 187, about a quarter mile from your south gate. I've been here since 4:30. You got a tip? Anonymous. Last night. A pause. Ben, I've already called the Texas Ranger Station in Kerrville and the FBI field office in San Antonio. Both calls are in motion. Her voice dropped even lower. But I need you to know, my sheriff just sent me a text telling me to stand down, to observe only, and make no contact. What are you going to do? A short silence. I'm already out of my car, she said. I'm staying. Ben closed his eyes for 1 second. Thank you, Elena. Don't thank me yet. I'm one deputy with a sidearm and a bad feeling. She paused again. Ben, who are these people? How many are we actually talking about? 300, give or take. Iron Spur. Razor Colton is at the gate. He heard her sharp intake of breath. She knew the name. Call me if anything moves, he said, and hung up. Tratiporn, the third call rang twice. Send coordinates, Ghost said. No hello. No, how bad is it? Just the clean, direct language of a man who had already been awake, already been thinking, already been ready since the moment Ben called him 2 nights ago. Ben sent the coordinates, the camera feeds, and the property layout file in one message while Ghost stayed on the line. I'm looking at it, Ghost said. There was the sound of movement, a door, Keys. Eastern Slope has a gap. I know. Their comm discipline is garbage. I know that too. How's Calvin? Basement. He's good. Rangers are coming? Elena made the call. Timeline is unclear. FBI? Same. Might be slow. Ben kept his voice even. I need you moving, Ghost. I've been moving since you said the word coordinates. A car engine started in the background. I've got someone with me. Old friend? He'll want to talk to you when we get there. Don't argue with him about it. Who? Someone you trust, Ghost said. That's all you need right now. The line went dead. Ben set his phone on the table. Outside, Razor's voice drifted through the window again. Louder now, impatient, the politeness completely gone. Mr. Tatum, I'm not a patient man. You've got about 10 minutes before this gets a lot less comfortable for you. Ben looked at the phone. 3 calls. Rangers coming. FBI notified. Ghost moving. 3 wheels turning. He stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked back to the porch. Below his feet, through the floorboards, he could hear Calvin moving in the basement. Working. Good. The boy had his grandfather's instincts, even if he didn't know it yet. Ben put his hands on the porch railing and looked out at Razor's men spread across his land like a stain. He had been in tighter spots than this. He just needed time. The first hour of the standoff was silence, not peaceful silence, the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses down on everything like a sky before a storm. Razor's men held their positions along the ridge, the road, and the fence lines, and Ben held his position on the porch, and nobody moved, and nobody spoke, and the morning light kept growing stronger, like it didn't know or care what was happening underneath it. Ben counted minutes the way he used to count them on Overwatch. Steady, patient, one at a time. Razor was testing him. That was clear. This whole display, 300 men standing in formation at dawn, wasn't an assault. It was a theater. It was the kind of pressure designed to work on a man's mind before it ever touched his body. The waiting, the watching, the sheer weight of numbers. Razor had done this before, and it had worked before. Because most men, when they looked out at 300 armed people surrounding everything they owned, eventually came off the porch and started negotiating. Ben had stood on a rooftop in Kandahar for 9 hours, waiting for a single target. He could wait. Then Razor got tired of waiting. He gave a signal. One hand, low, almost casual, and 2 men at the east fence line moved forward. They had wire cutters. Ben watched them from the porch without moving. They worked slowly and deliberately, making sure he could see every snip. This wasn't practical. The fence being down didn't give them any real tactical advantage. This was a message. We can take what we want. We can destroy what you built. And there is nothing you can do about it. The section of fence came down in about 40 seconds. The 2 men stepped back and looked up at the porch. Ben looked back at them. Then the gunshot cracked across the pasture like something breaking in half. It was a single shot. One of Razor's men on the north ridge, rifle raised. The brown mare, the one Ben had been feeding by hand since she was a foal, the one his late wife had named Sadie, lurched forward and went down in the grass without a sound. The world went very still. Ben stood at the porch railing and felt something move through him that he had no name for. Not grief. Grief was something you felt later, alone, when you had the time for it. Not rage. Rage made you stupid and slow. It was something colder than both of those things. Cleaner. The feeling of a decision being made so deep inside you that it didn't need words. He walked to the porch railing and gripped it with both hands and looked out at Razor across 40 yards of open ground. "You just made a serious mistake," he said. His voice was completely level. No shaking. No heat. Razor smiled. It was a wide, slow smile. The smile of a man who thought he had just watched someone break. He turned to the men on either side of him and said something Ben couldn't hear. They laughed. Others along the fence line laughed too. the easy, contemptuous laughter of people who believed the situation was already decided. They saw a 58-year-old rancher gripping his porch railing. They did not see the after-action report from Ramadi, 2006. They did not see the Silver Star citation, 3 paragraphs of which were still classified. They did not see 11 hours of night fighting with 3 wounded men and ammunition running low, and not one single moment of panic in the man who held the position until dawn. Ben let them laugh. Below the kitchen floor, Calvin had heard the shot. He was sitting on the basement floor with his back against the wall and his laptop open on his knees when the sound came through the ceiling like a fist. He flinched so hard he almost dropped the computer. His heart was slamming. His hands were shaking when he picked up his phone and typed the text. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He stared at the screen. 1 minute? 2 minutes? The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "I'm fine. Stay down. Keep working." Calvin exhaled. His hands were still shaking. He pressed them flat against his knees, took 3 slow breaths, and turned back to his laptop. If he couldn't be up there with his grandfather, he was going to find every single piece of ammunition he could from down here. He opened the Ridley Vista Environmental Impact Study and started reading. Calvin had always been good at research. It was the thing his professors noticed first. Not just that he was smart, but that he was thorough. The kind of student who didn't stop at the first answer, but kept pulling threads until the whole picture came apart in his hands. It made him a good law student. Right now, crouched on the basement floor of his grandfather's farmhouse, with 300 armed men standing on the property above him, it might make him something more useful than that. He pulled up the Ridley Vista Environmental Impact Study on his laptop. It was a public document, filed with the county as part of the development approval process and available through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality's online database. 214 pages, dense with charts, water table measurements, soil composition data, projected runoff calculations. The kind of document most people looked at for 30 seconds before their eyes glazed over. Calvin read it the way Ben had taught him to read anything important. From the beginning. Every page. He was on page 47 when he found the first number that didn't sit right. It was in the aquifer projection table, a set of figures showing the projected annual draw on the local water table from the Ridley Vista Resort once it was fully operational. Golf courses used enormous amounts of water. Everyone knew that. But the number in the study was less than half of what Calvin's basic calculations suggested it should be, based on the square footage of the planned course and standard industry water use figures he'd learned in an environmental law seminar 2 semesters ago. He stopped, went back, read the footnote. The footnote referenced a 2021 hydrological survey conducted by Ridley Development's own consultants, Meridian Environmental Group. It cited that survey as the basis for the water draw projections. Calvin searched for the Meridian survey in the document. It wasn't there. Referenced but not attached. Not included. He sat with that for a moment. Then he called Dr. Reyes. Dr. Shane Reyes was a professor of environmental science at UT Austin who had testified in 3 major Texas water rights cases and had once described Ridley Development's environmental practices in a published paper as aggressively optimistic. Calvin had taken her groundwater law seminar in his 2nd year. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Calvin, why are you calling me at—" She stopped. "Where are you?" "I'm in my grandfather's basement." He kept his voice low and steady. "Dr. Reyes, I'm looking at the Ridley Vista EIS. The aquifer draw projections are citing a 2021 Meridian hydrological survey that isn't attached to the document. The numbers don't match standard draw rates for a development this size." A pause. "Pull up the USGS water table database. Kerr County. Cross-reference against the Edwards Trinity aquifer monitoring data from the last 5 years." Calvin was already typing. He found the database, found Kerr County, found the monitoring data. He pulled the coordinates for Tatum's Bluff specifically and looked at what came up. His stomach dropped. Dr. Reyes. His voice came out quieter than he intended. The aquifer beneath my grandfather's land isn't just feeding his property. No, she said. It isn't. This is showing it as a primary recharge zone for the entire Edwards Trinity system in this section of the county. He scrolled through the data, reading fast. 6 communities are drawing from this. 6. He found the township breakdowns and his chest tightened, including Millbrook Heights and Rio Seco, both of which already have compromised municipal water infrastructure, Dr. Reyes said quietly. There are 40,000 people on this aquifer. At least, she said. Calvin, what you're looking at is not a data gap. I've seen the Meridian survey, the original one, not the version that got filed. I was asked to peer review it 2 years ago, and then never heard anything more about it. The original survey flagged exactly what you're finding. The development as designed would draw down and introduce contaminant risk into the primary water source for that entire corridor. She paused. That finding was not in the document that got filed with the county. Calvin sat very still on the cold basement floor. They buried it, he said. Someone did, Dr. Reyes said carefully. I can send you the original survey. I kept my copy. Please, Calvin said. Right now. He stared at the screen while the email came through, hands no longer shaking, past shaking now into something harder and more focused than fear. He typed the text to Ben with his thumbs moving fast. Grandpa, the aquifer, 40,000 people. Ridley buried the report. He hit send, closed the Ridley document, and opened a new window. He had a lot more digging to do. The Texas sun had climbed high and mean by the time the Rangers arrived. Ben heard the engines before he saw the vehicles. 2 white Ford F-250s coming up County Road 187 from the south. Moving fast, dust rising behind them in the afternoon heat. He tracked them from the porch, without changing his posture. Razor's men saw them too. He watched the ripple move through the formation. Heads turning, shoulders shifting. The subtle but unmistakable body language of people recalculating. The trucks turned onto the Tatum's Bluff Drive and stopped just inside the gate. 2 Rangers stepped out, both in the gray uniforms, both with the unhurried, deliberate movements of men who had handled worse than this on worse days. The taller one, lean, weathered, somewhere in his mid-50s with a gray mustache and the kind of eyes that didn't miss much, walked toward the porch while his partner stayed near the vehicles and put eyes on the perimeter. Mr. Tatum. He stopped at the base of the porch steps. Sergeant Dale Hollis, Texas Rangers Company F. You want to tell me what we're looking at here? Ben came down the steps and told him. He talked for 8 minutes. He gave Hollis everything. The offer, the coordinated legal harassment, the 3 simultaneous notices, the designation, the nighttime surveillance truck, the dawn encirclement, the fence, and Sadie. He described it the way he used to describe hostile situations in mission debriefs, sequential, factual, no embellishment required because the facts were already bad enough. Hollis listened without interrupting once, which Ben appreciated. A man who listened well was a man worth talking to. When Ben finished, Hollis looked out at the ridge line, then at the road, then at the east fence where the section was still down. Iron spur, he said flatly. Razor Colton at the gate. Hollis's jaw tightened just slightly. I know that name. He looked back at Ben. Mr. Tatum, I believe every word you've told me. I want you to know that. He turned to his partner and gave a nod. What happened next took less than 20 minutes. The Rangers didn't charge anyone, didn't draw weapons, didn't need to. Hollis walked directly to the front gate and spoke to Razor in a voice Ben couldn't fully hear from the porch, but could read by the way Razor's posture changed. The easy confidence drained out of him like water from a tipped glass. He glanced past Hollis toward the 2 Ranger vehicles, toward the radio equipment, toward the cameras, toward the paper trail that Rangers always brought with them. And he made the calculation that men like him always made when the math stopped working in their favor. He gave the signal. That same low, casual hand movement, and just like that, 300 men started disappearing. Not running, not scattering, just dissolving, peeling off the ridgeline in twos and threes, pulling back from the road, fading into the surrounding terrain with the practiced ease of people who had done this particular vanishing act before. Within 5 minutes, the north fence was clear. Within 10, the ridge was empty. Within 20, the road was open, and the only vehicles on the property belonged to the law. The gate was closed. The pasture was still. Tatum's Bluff was quiet again. Calvin came up from the basement, blinking in the afternoon light. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looked out at the empty ridge, and let out a long, slow breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for 6 hours. Ben came in from the porch. Behind him, Deputy Elena Vance walked up the drive at a fast clip, still holstered, her face carrying the particular expression of someone who had been holding themselves very tightly for a very long time, and was only now beginning to let go. The three of them stood on the porch together, Ben, Calvin, Elena, and for a moment nobody said anything. Sergeant Hollis came up the steps and shook Ben's hand. "I'm going to need a full, formal statement, Mr. Tatum. Everything you told me, on record." "Whatever you need," Ben said. Calvin put his arm around his grandfather's shoulders. He was a full inch taller than Ben, and didn't usually let himself show how much he loved the man. But right now, standing on Amela May's porch in the afternoon sun, with the ridge clear and the road open, he held on. Elena Vance finally exhaled. Ben looked out over the empty hill line. He didn't exhale. He kept watching. The farmhouse smelled like garlic and onions by 6 o'clock. Ben cooked when he needed to think. It was a habit his late wife Jasmine had always teased him about. The more serious the situation, the more elaborate the meal. Tonight, he was making her mother's smothered chicken, and the fact that he was making it told Calvin everything about how serious things actually were. Calvin sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, his notes from the aquifer research spread in a neat stack beside it. He had spent the last hour walking Ben through everything. Dr. Reyes's confirmation, the original Meridian survey, the 40,000 people drawing water from the Edwards Trinity recharge zone directly beneath their feet. Ben had listened to all of it without speaking, stirring the pan, his back to the room, absorbing every word. When Calvin finished, Ben had said, "Good work." 2 words. But the way he said them meant considerably more. The chicken was nearly done when Sergeant Hollis called. Ben wiped his hands on a dish towel and answered, "Mr. Tatum." Hollis's voice had something in it now that hadn't been there this afternoon. A careful, almost apologetic quality that made Ben set down the towel and give the call his full attention. "I need to tell you about some developments. I want you to hear this from me directly." "Go ahead." District Attorney Clifford Nelson filed a counter-complaint this afternoon. Hollis paused. "He's characterizing today's incident as an unlawful confrontation initiated by you against, and I want you to know how much I dislike saying this, against Ridley Development's lawfully assembled representatives." The kitchen was very quiet. "Lawfully assembled," Ben said. "I know," Hollis said. "I know exactly what it sounds like. The language is his, not mine. There's no arrest. Nothing is imminent. But it creates a legal cloud that his team will use to slow everything down." Another pause. "There's more. Ridley's attorneys filed a formal challenge to the historic landmark designation this afternoon. Emergency motion. A hearing's been set for 8 a.m. 3 days from now. Judge Elmer's courtroom." Ben knew the name Elmer. Everybody in Kerr County knew that name. "I understand," Ben said. "Thank you for calling me yourself, Sergeant." He hung up and stood at the stove for a moment without moving. Calvin was already looking at him. He had heard enough to know. Ghost called 11 minutes later. "The FBI investigation is stalled," Ghost said. No preamble. Elena's call made it through, but somewhere between San Antonio and Washington, it got flagged for jurisdictional review. There's a lobbyist, name of Steve Oster, Ridley has him on retainer, who has a relationship with someone in the regional U.S. Attorney's office. The investigation isn't dead, but it's buried in procedural mud. A pause. We're talking months, Ben, not days. Ben said nothing. I'm still moving, Ghost said. That hasn't changed. I know, Ben said. Keep moving. He ended the call and turned off the stove. Nobody was going to eat smothered chicken tonight. Calvin found the news broadcast. He turned the laptop screen toward Ben without saying anything first, because there were no words that would have adequately prepared him for what was on it. A local news anchor, bright studio lights, sympathetic expression. A segment titled Ridley Vista, Progress or Provocation. And then Ben's face on the screen, his property records photo, stiff and unflattering, alongside polished aerial renderings of the proposed resort, while a voiceover described a promising regional development facing resistance from an armed agitator who threatened peaceful business negotiations. His name, his property, his face, reframed completely, inverted. The man who had been surrounded on his own land by 300 armed men was now the aggressor in a story written entirely by the people who sent those men. Ben watched the full segment without speaking. When it ended, he reached over and closed the laptop gently, the way you close a door on something you don't want in your house anymore. Calvin was on his feet. Grandpa, we have to. Sit down, Ben said quietly. Calvin sat. Ben pulled out a chair and sat across from his grandson at Amela May's kitchen table, the same table she had sat at in 1921, in a county that didn't want her, after a deed office clerk had stared at her like she had lost her mind. She had put her money on the counter anyway. She had signed anyway. She had stayed anyway. Ben looked at Calvin. They want a fight in the courts and the press, he said. Good. He folded his hands on the table. That's where I was always going to win. Ben didn't sleep that night. He didn't try to. He made a fresh pot of coffee, pulled every document he had from the locked filing cabinet in the bedroom, 11 years of careful, methodical record-keeping, and spread it all across Amela May's kitchen table. Letters, legal filings, campaign finance records he'd printed from public databases, photographs, dates, names. Every communication from Ridley's office since the first approach 2 years ago, organized chronologically in a series of manila folders with handwritten tabs. Calvin came back downstairs at 9, took one look at the table, and sat down without being asked. Elena Vance knocked on the door at 9:30, still in her uniform, technically off duty, but carrying herself like a woman who hadn't decided to stop working yet. Ben poured her coffee without asking. Reverend Dorothy May Anson arrived at 10 with a covered dish of cornbread and her leather address book, the one she'd been filling since 1974, thick as a Bible and twice as well used. She set both on the counter, looked at the table covered in documents, and nodded once like she had been expecting exactly this. All right, she said, settling into a chair. Let's get to work. Ben stood at the head of the table and laid it out. We have 4 moves, he said. Each one matters. Together there's something Ridley can't contain. He held up one finger. Calvin's aquifer data. Dr. Reyes's original Meridian survey. The USGS cross-reference, all of it, goes to 3 national journalists tonight. Not local. National. He looked at Calvin. Ghost has contacts at a Washington investigative desk. A Houston environmental reporter who broke the Midland water story in 2019, and a New York outlet that covered the Flint crisis. All 3 are serious people. He set a printed list on the table. This isn't a local story about a land dispute. This is a federal story about a billionaire who knowingly planned to poison the water supply of 40,000 people, a majority of them Black and Latino. That story runs itself. Calvin was already pulling up his files. Ben held up a second finger. Everything in these folders, every letter from Ridley's office, every legal filing, every notice, cross-referenced against these. He laid down 3 pages of printed campaign finance records, each line highlighted in yellow. County D.A. Clifford Nelson, Judge Barry Elmer, 3 of 5 Kerr County Zoning Board members, all with documented financial connections to Ridley Development Group or its subsidiaries, all a matter of public record for anyone willing to spend 2 weeks pulling the filings. This goes to the Texas Rangers Public Integrity Unit, Ben said. Not the county, not Nelson. State level, directly to the unit commander in Austin, tonight. Elena, I need your help getting it to the right hands. Elena was already writing a name and number on the back of a napkin. I know exactly who to call, she said. Third finger. Ben turned to Reverend Dorothy May. 12 families, he said. She opened her address book. Over the next 40 minutes, she walked the table through 12 separate cases, 12 families across Kerr County, and 2 neighboring counties who had faced coordinated legal and financial pressure from Ridley Development over the past decade. Lost permits, manipulated assessments, zoning changes that appeared from nowhere. 3 families who ultimately sold under duress. All documented. All with records. All, when Reverend Dorothy May called them tonight, willing to go on the record for the first time. They've been waiting for someone to go first, she said quietly. Ben, you're going first. The 4th move Ben saved for last. He told them about the recording. 2 years ago, during a separate water rights dispute involving a neighboring property, a Ridley Development senior executive named Warren Alders had a phone conversation with a Kerr County official that Ben's attorney had legally obtained through a discovery process that was later settled privately. On that recording, Alders discussed using what he called community pressure to move holdout landowners off targeted properties. The language was careful, but it wasn't careful enough. Ben had held it for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. That moment, he said, is 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. The table was quiet for a beat. Then Elena said, You built all of this before any of it started. Ben sat down. He picked up his coffee. I built it when I saw what was coming. I've been in situations where the only ammunition I had left was what I'd prepared before the shooting started. He looked around the table, at Calvin, at Elena, at Reverend Dorothy May's steady, knowing eyes. You prepare. You wait. And then, when the time comes, you don't hesitate. They worked until 3 in the morning. Amela May's table, covered in documents, 4 people bent over it by lamplight, building something Donovan Ridley had no idea was coming. The last lamp was still burning at 4 in the morning when headlights swept across the kitchen window. Ben was at the table, still working, a cold cup of coffee at his elbow. Calvin had fallen asleep in his chair an hour ago, head resting on his folded arms, laptop still open beside him. Elena was on the couch with her notepad on her chest, eyes closed. Reverend Dorothy May had gone home at midnight after making 11 of her 12 calls. Every single one of them answered. Every single one of them, yes. Ben watched the headlights through the window without moving. One vehicle, moving at a steady pace up the drive, no hesitation. He knew the way Ghost drove. Purposeful, no wasted motion. The same way he did everything. He stood up, rolled his shoulders, and went to the door. Ghost was exactly as Ben remembered him. 54 years old, built like a man who had never once in his life stopped training, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that calm was its own kind of weapon. He stepped out of the passenger side of the truck and gripped Ben's hand in both of his. You look terrible, Ghost said. You drove through the night, Ben said. You look worse. Ghost almost smiled. He stepped aside. The man who came around from the driver's side was tall, 6'2" at least, with a clean-shaved head, broad shoulders, and a dark suit that looked like it had been pressed despite the all-night drive. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of someone who had walked into difficult rooms his entire professional life, and had never once walked out of one without winning. Lieutenant Commander Max Fieldson, United States Navy, retired. He extended his hand. Ben, It's been too long. Ben shook it. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The particular look shared between people who have been through something together that can't be adequately explained to anyone who wasn't there. You didn't have to drive all night, Ben said. Yes, I did, Fieldson said simply. He looked out at the dark farmhouse, the porch, the pasture beyond it. This is Amela May's land. It is? Fieldson nodded like that settled something. Then let's make sure it stays that way. Calvin woke up to the sound of voices and came into the kitchen to find two men he had never seen before sitting at the table with his grandfather, a fresh pot of coffee between them and Ghost's hard drive open on the laptop screen. Ben introduced them. Calvin shook both hands. When Ben explained who Fieldson was, civil rights attorney, former SEAL on quiet retainer for 8 months, Calvin stood very still for a moment. 8 months, Calvin said. He looked at his grandfather. You had a civil rights attorney on retainer for 8 months and didn't tell anyone. I told Ghost, Ben said. Ghost raised his coffee mug without looking up from the screen. Calvin sat down slowly, the particular expression of a law student who has just realized he has been watching a master class without knowing it. Fieldson worked fast. He moved through Calvin's aquifer documentation first, the Meridian survey comparison, Dr. Reyes's confirmation, the USGS data, reading with the focused speed of a man who processed complex material for a living. He asked 3 precise questions, got 3 precise answers from Calvin, and moved on. He reviewed Ben's campaign finance cross-references, the coordination evidence, the 12 family testimonies Reverend Dorothy May had collected. He listened to 30 seconds of Warren Alders's recorded conversation with the county official and set the phone down on the table. This is a federal case, he said. Civil rights violations, environmental fraud, coordinated coercion. We filed today. By 6 a.m, Fieldson was on the phone with 3 national journalists. Ghost had confirmed their credentials and their editorial independence 2 days ago. A Washington investigative reporter, the Houston environmental journalist who had broken the Midland water contamination story, and a national outlet with a civil rights desk that had covered every major environmental justice case in the South for 15 years. All 3 confirmed attendance at a 7 a.m. press conference at Tatum's Bluff. Elena called the Texas Rangers Public Integrity Unit commander at 6:15. The investigator who answered was already aware of the situation. He would be at the courthouse by 8 with a subpoena. At 6:45, Ben went upstairs and changed into a clean shirt. He came back down and stood at the kitchen window, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, watching the first light come up over the eastern ridge, the same ridge that 24 hours ago had been lined with 300 armed men. It was empty now, just oak trees and open sky and the first pale gold of a Texas sunrise breaking over Amela May's land. He stayed at the window until the light was full. Then he turned around and went to the porch. It was time. The journalists arrived at 6:55, 3 of them in 2 vehicles, parking at the gate with the careful, unhurried efficiency of people who had covered serious stories before and knew that serious stories required serious preparation. They set up quickly, a small portable podium that Ghost had driven through the night to bring, 2 cameras on tripods, a digital recorder on the railing. Professional, clean. The kind of setup that said, this is not a local news segment. This was something else entirely. Reverend Dorothy May arrived back at 6:58 in her Sunday dress, her leather address book tucked under her arm like scripture. She took her position to the left of the podium without being asked, her chin up, her eyes clear. 71 years old and not 1 ounce of backing down anywhere in her body. At 7 o'clock exactly, Max Fieldson stepped up to the podium. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. My name is Max Fieldson. I am a civil rights attorney and a retired lieutenant commander of the United States Navy. I am here this morning on behalf of my client, Mr. Ben Elijah Tatum, and on behalf of the communities whose lives are directly affected by what I am about to share with you. He paused. Let the cameras settle. I want to introduce you to Ben Tatum. Ben stood behind and to the right of the podium. Clean shirt, work boots, his hands at his sides, completely still. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been standing his ground his entire life and saw no reason to stop now. Mr. Tatum is 58 years old, Fieldson said. He is a cattle rancher and horse breeder. He is a grandfather. He is the great-great-grandson of Amela Mae Tatum, who in 1921 became one of the first black women in Kerr County, Texas, to hold a property deed, land she purchased with 14 years of her own savings, in a county that made clear it did not want her to have it. He let that sit for a moment. Mr. Tatum is also a 26-year veteran of United States Naval Special Warfare. He holds 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. The Silver Star citation, in part, remains classified. One of the journalists, the woman from the Washington desk, glanced up from her recorder toward Ben. He looked back at her without expression. Yesterday morning, Fieldson continued, Mr. Tatum stood on the porch of his great-great-grandmother's farmhouse while 300 armed men surrounded his property at the direction of Donovan Ridley and Ridley Development Group in response to Mr. Tatum's refusal to sell land that his family has held for over 100 years. He picked up the first document from the stack beside him. What I am presenting this morning is not a complaint. It is a case. A federal case filed today in the Western District of Texas. He went through it methodically, each piece landing like a stone. The Suppressed Meridian Environmental Survey, Dr. Reyes's confirmation, the USGS data showing the Edwards Trinity Recharge Zone directly beneath Tatum's Bluff, the primary water source for 6 surrounding communities, 2 of them predominantly Black and Latino, with already compromised municipal infrastructure. 40,000 people. He named all 6 communities out loud, slowly, so every recorder in front of him caught every word. He presented the campaign finance records. He named D.A. Clifford Nelson. He named Judge Barry Elmer. He named 3 members of the Kerr County Zoning Board. He laid the documented financial connections between each of them and Ridley Development Group on the podium like evidence at trial. Because that is exactly what it was. Then he picked up Ben's phone and pressed play on Warren Alders's recorded conversation. The courtyard was absolutely silent while it played. When it finished, Fieldson set the phone down. That recording was obtained legally. It will be submitted as exhibit evidence in today's federal filing. He turned to Reverend Dorothy May. She stepped forward and read 12 names, 12 families, 12 properties, 12 stories of coordinated coercion across a decade. Her voice was steady and strong and did not waver once. When she finished, Fieldson looked directly into the cameras. We are filing today on charges of coordinated civil rights violations, environmental fraud, and criminal coercion. We are naming Donovan Ridley, Ridley Development Group, and 6 Kerr County officials individually. He gathered his papers. This land belongs to the Tatum family. It has always belonged to the Tatum family. And as of this morning, the entire country knows why. Calvin stood just inside the porch doorway, watching his grandfather. Ben hadn't moved once through the entire 22 minutes. Hadn't shifted his weight. Hadn't looked away. Hadn't shown anything on his face that the cameras could use against him. He stood exactly the way Amela Mae must have stood at that deed office counter in 1921, like a person who knew exactly what they were owed and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. At 7:43, the story went live on 3 national platforms simultaneously. Ben's phone began ringing. He looked at the screen, turned it face down on the railing, and picked up his coffee instead. They arrived at the Kerr County Courthouse at 7:55. 5 of them. Ben, Calvin, Fieldson, Elena, and Ghost, walking across the parking lot in the early morning heat, the kind of dry Texas heat that was already working hard before 8 o'clock. Ben walked at the same pace he always walked. Fieldson had his briefcase. Ghost had the hard drive. Calvin had printed copies of every document they had presented at the press conference, organized in a binder that was 3 inches thick. The courthouse steps were already busy. 2 of the 3 journalists from the press conference were positioned near the entrance with cameras. A small group of community members, faces Ben recognized, people from Millbrook Heights and Rio Seco, people who had heard the story go live that morning and driven out before sunrise, stood quietly to one side. Reverend Dorothy May was already there, her address book in hand, speaking in a low voice to a young woman Ben didn't recognize who was holding a notepad. And at the bottom of the steps, standing apart from everyone else with his phone pressed to his ear and his face the color of old chalk, was Harlan Birch. He saw Ben. He looked away first. Courtroom B was smaller than it sounded. 20 rows of dark wood benches, a low ceiling, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly and turned everything slightly yellow. The Ridley legal team was already at the plaintiff's table. 4 attorneys in expensive suits, the kind of legal firepower you assembled when you expected to win easily. They had a paralegal and 2 interns. They had matching leather portfolios. They arranged themselves with the practiced ease of people who had been in this room before and knew exactly how it worked. Fieldson set his briefcase on the defense table, opened it, and placed a 6-inch legal filing on the surface, with a sound that carried across the quiet courtroom. One of the Ridley attorneys glanced at it, then at Fieldson. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite confidence anymore. In the gallery, the 2 journalists settled into the front row. Behind them sat the Texas Rangers public integrity investigator, a compact, serious-faced man named Nash, who had arrived at 7:45 with a subpoena folded in his breast pocket. He nodded at Elena when she came in. She nodded back. Calvin sat at the defense table beside Fieldson and kept his hands flat and still on the surface, the way Ben had taught him to sit when he needed to look like he had already won. Judge Barry Elmer entered at 8:03. He was 61, silver-haired, with the comfortable authority of a man who had run this courtroom unchallenged for 19 years. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room. His eyes moved across the gallery. The journalists, Investigator Deering, the community members who had packed the last 4 rows. They moved to the defense table, to Fieldson's 6-inch filing, to Ben sitting behind the rail with his hands folded and his eyes steady. Elmer's face did not change, but something behind it did. He looked down at his papers. He looked up again. He removed his glasses, cleaned them, and replaced them. A small gesture, a thinking gesture, the gesture of a man running rapid calculations that weren't going well for him. He leaned toward his clerk and exchanged 4 quiet words. The clerk nodded and left through the side door. At 8:11, Judge Barry Elmer cleared his throat. "Before these proceedings commence," he said carefully, "I am recusing myself from this matter, effective immediately, citing an appearance of potential conflict of interest. This case will be reassigned." The Ridley attorneys went very still. One of them started to rise. "Your Honor, we would respectfully object—" "Counsel!" Elmer's voice was flat. "Sit down." The attorney sat down. The substitute judge, the Honorable Sasha Morrison, brought in from Kendall County, with no financial ties to Ridley Development or anyone connected to it, took her seat at 9:15. She reviewed the historic landmark designation documentation for 40 minutes. She listened to Fieldson's argument for 11 minutes. She asked 4 specific questions, 2 to Fieldson, 2 to the Ridley team, and received 4 answers, 2 of which satisfied her and 2 of which clearly did not. At 10:22, she sustained the designation. Tatum's Bluff, all 400 acres, permanently protected under the Texas Historic Landmark Statute. The Ridley legal team gathered their matching leather portfolios in silence. They exited the courtroom without speaking to the press. Birch, waiting in the hallway, fell into step beside the lead attorney. Ben watched them through the courtroom window as they crossed the parking lot. On the courthouse steps, journalists called Ben's name from 3 directions at once. He stopped on the top step and looked out at them. Cameras up. Recorders extended. The small crowd of community members from Millbrook Heights and Rio Seco watching from the side, some of them with their hands pressed together, some of them with tears on their faces that they weren't bothering to wipe away. Ben looked at all of them and said the only thing that needed to be said. Amela Mae Tatum bought that land in 1921. His voice was steady and clear. It belongs to our family. A pause. It always will. He descended the steps. Calvin took his arm at the bottom, and the two of them walked to the truck together. The courthouse crowded with cameras behind them, both of them quiet, the morning wide open ahead. The sun was going down over Tatum's Bluff. Ben sat on the porch in the same chair he had sat in every evening for 11 years, coffee in hand, watching the light change over Amela Mae's land the way it always did at this hour. Gold first, then copper, then a deep burning orange that turned the oak trees into silhouettes and made the creek glitter like something precious down in the valley below. Calvin was beside him in the other chair, his long legs stretched out, his suit jacket folded over the railing. He had loosened his tie sometime between the courthouse and home and hadn't bothered with it since. He looked exhausted and 20 years older than he had 4 days ago, and Ben thought that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Some ages you earn. Neither of them spoke for a while. They just sat and watched the light go. The consequences came the way consequences always come, when the truth finally has enough room to move. Not all at once, but in a steady, unstoppable sequence, each one arriving before the last one had fully settled. The first 3 called before sunset. 3 Ridley Vista institutional investors, 2 real estate funds and a Texas-based private equity group, issued identical statements within hours of each other, announcing the suspension of their commitments pending comprehensive due diligence review. Ridley Development's communications team released a response that used the words confident and committed 4 times in 2 paragraphs, which meant they were neither. The EPA called the following morning. A formal inquiry into the Ridley Vista environmental impact study had been opened, specifically regarding the discrepancy between the filed aquifer projections and the original Meridian survey. Dr. Reyes had submitted her documentation voluntarily and on record. The inquiry was not a suggestion. It had teeth. By the end of the week, the Texas Attorney General announced a state investigation into Ridley Development Group's conduct in Kerr County and 2 neighboring counties, covering a decade of land acquisition practices. Donovan Ridley, who had spent 30 years cultivating the image of a visionary civic leader and job creator, was now the lead story on 3 national news networks. His photograph, the polished headshot from the Ridley Development website, appeared under headlines he had never imagined seeing his name beneath. Ben watched one broadcast. Then he turned the television off and didn't turn it back on. Razor Colton was arrested on a Tuesday morning. A federal RICO indictment, built from 2 years of surveillance evidence the FBI had been accumulating, waiting for a clean hook to attach it to, came down on Iron Spur's leadership simultaneously across 3 counties. Razor was taken at a gas station outside Kerrville at 7:15 a.m. in handcuffs, in front of a security camera that caught every second of it. His crew, leaderless and suddenly very amorison of how exposed they were, scattered within 48 hours. Ghost texted Ben a single word when it happened. Done. Ben texted back, "Thank you." The county officials fell in sequence after that, like dominoes that had been leaning for years and only needed one good push. D.A. Clifford Nelson resigned on a Wednesday, citing personal reasons in a 2-sentence statement that convinced no one. 2 members of the Kerr County Zoning Board followed within the week. The dispatcher, who had told Ben that response time was 45 minutes to an hour, in a rehearsed voice on a recorded line, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Criminal referrals were filed in all 4 cases. Judge Barry Elmer announced his retirement at the end of the month. The civil rights settlement came 6 weeks later. $14 million. Ridley Development Group, under pressure from the federal filing, the state investigation, and the complete collapse of the Ridley Vista financing, settled rather than go to trial. Fieldson negotiated every cent of it in a conference room in Austin, with 4 Ridley attorneys who had stopped making eye contact with each other sometime around the second day. Ben directed a portion of the settlement, $3 million, into a newly established fund. He named it the Amela May Tatum Community Water Trust. Its purpose: to fund clean water infrastructure improvements for the 6 communities that drew from the Edwards Trinity recharge zone beneath his land: Millbrook Heights, Rio Seco, 4 others whose names he had memorized the morning Calvin texted him from the basement. The 12 families whose cases Reverend Dorothy May had documented received pro bono representation from Fieldson's firm, effective immediately. On the porch, the last of the light was fading. Calvin turned his coffee mug slowly in his hands. He had been quiet for a long time, thinking something through, and Ben had learned long ago to let the boy think. Finally, Calvin looked over. "Grandpa, when they surrounded the ranch, 300 of them at dawn, were you scared?" Ben was quiet for a moment. He looked out over Amela May's land, the creek catching the last light, the oak trees going dark, 400 acres that a woman with a leather purse and 14 years of savings had walked into a hostile deed office to buy, alone, in 1921, because she decided that what her family deserved was solid ground to stand on. "Son," Ben said, "I've been in harder spots than that with less preparation and worse odds." He took a sip of his coffee. "But between you and me?" He looked at Calvin. "Not even a little." The last light faded over Tatum's bluff. Ben stayed on the porch until the stars came out. He always did. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.